My name is Brooke Bennett, and I was 33 the day my sister handed me a dress the color of a traffic cone. 7 bridesmaids stood in a sunlit suite, slipping into identical lavender gowns, fitted, floor-length, gorgeous. I stood in a side hallway, holding a bright orange sack marked 2XL, 3 sizes too big. I pinned the waist with a safety pin from my travel kit. The pin bent, the fabric bunched like a parachute. When I asked Sloane about it, she tilted her head and smiled. It was the only one left. My parents told me to stop being dramatic. The photographer kept steering me to the back of every frame, and by the time the cake was cut, my sister ran out of her own wedding, because the woman sitting 3 rows back had been paying attention when nobody else bothered to. But I'll get there. First, you need to know what kind of family hands their eldest daughter a clown suit and calls it a bridesmaid dress. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women face impossible families and walk out with their dignity intact. If quiet justice is your kind of justice, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I'm a structural engineer. I co-own a small firm in Raleigh that does commercial inspections and retrofit designs. Nothing glamorous, but it's mine. I built it from a community college transfer, 3 years of waitressing at a steakhouse, and a state university degree I paid for myself. Dollar by dollar, tip by tip. My sister Sloane is 4 years younger, 29, and has always been the sun in our family's solar system. She's charming. She photographs well. She has a laugh that makes people lean closer. And she was marrying Daniel Whitlock, whose family owned half the vineyards in the Shenandoah Valley. Our mother, Diane, had been planning this wedding like a general plans an invasion. Every centerpiece, every toast, every seating chart calibrated for maximum impression on the Whitlock side. I was included in the bridal party because not including me would look suspicious. A bride who doesn't invite her own sister raises questions. So I was in, technically. I got the text 3 weeks before the wedding. "Your bridesmaid 8, Sloane wrote. No emoji, no warmth. Just a slot number. I should have paid more attention to that number. 8 bridesmaids, 7 lavender gowns. The math was already decided before I ever RSVP'd. But I told myself it was family. I told myself one day would be fine. I ironed my good blouse for the rehearsal dinner and drove 4 hours from Raleigh without complaining. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. I show up. I hold things together. It's my best quality and my worst habit. And Sloane knew it. The Whitlocks were old Virginia money, the kind of family that names buildings after grandparents and keeps a land trust instead of a savings account. Daniel was decent, quiet. He opened doors and remembered names, and seemed genuinely baffled by how lucky he was to be marrying Sloane. I liked him. I think most people did. His mother was pleasant in a polished, careful way. His father talked about horses. But the real center of gravity was his grandmother, Margaret Whitlock. She was 79, small, silver-haired, with posture like a steel beam. She sat in the front row at the rehearsal with her hands folded over a pearl-handled cane, watching everything. The way the florist arranged the peonies, the way the groomsmen joked, the way Sloane touched Daniel's arm. Margaret didn't miss things. I noticed her watching me once during the rehearsal dinner when I was refilling my own water glass because the server skipped our table. She held my gaze for about 3 seconds. Then she looked at Sloane, then back at me. I didn't think much of it. I was busy surviving the evening, sitting between Aunt Renee, who kept reminding me to smile more, and a groomsman who asked me twice if I was the sister with the issues. I found out later that phrase came from Sloane's own description of me, but at the time I just thought he was rude. I excused myself early, drove back to my hotel, and sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on. Tomorrow was the wedding. I'd stand where they told me, smile when the camera pointed, and leave before the bouquet toss. That was the plan. The morning of the wedding, I showed up at the bridal suite at 8 sharp. The room was a dream. Champagne on ice, 7 garment bags hanging in a row like lavender soldiers, a makeup artist with a ring light, a playlist of Sloane's favorite songs humming through a Bluetooth speaker. The 7 other bridesmaids were already there, laughing, matching robes monogrammed with their initials. My name wasn't on a robe. "Oh, Brooke, you're getting ready down the hall," Sloane said, not looking up from her phone. "The small room. Your dress is in there." The small room was a linen closet with a mirror propped against a stack of folding chairs. Inside the garment bag was the orange dress. Not burnt orange, not terracotta. Safety cone orange. Bright, synthetic polyester that smelled like a shipping container. I held it up. The shoulders drooped past my arms. The waist could have fit two of me. Size 2XL. I wear a small. I walked back to the suite. "Sloane, this can't be right. It's 3 sizes too big." She looked at me with that camera-ready smile. It was the only one left. Behind her, Aunt Renee adjusted her own perfect lavender sash. "Stop being dramatic," Renee said. "It's not about you." I stood there, holding the dress like a deflated balloon, and nobody in that room, not one of the 7 women in matching gowns, said a word. I went back to the linen closet. I pinned the waist with 2 safety pins. One kept slipping. The polyester was too slick to hold. I looked in the propped-up mirror and saw exactly what they wanted me to see. Someone who didn't belong. I found my mother in the hallway outside the bridal suite, adjusting the bow on a flower girl's sash. Diane Bennett, at 58, was a woman who dressed for the life she believed she deserved, not the one she had. Today, that meant a slate blue mother of the bride suit with pearl buttons and shoes that matched her handbag. "Mom, the dress doesn't fit. It's enormous and it's orange. Can we swap with one of the spares?" She didn't look up. "What spares?" I saw a rack inside the suite. There were at least 2 extra lavender gowns hanging. "Those are for emergencies." "This is an emergency." She straightened, finally meeting my eyes. Her expression was the one she used when I asked for things as a kid. Patient, practiced, closed. "Brooke, don't ruin your sister's day. You know how hard she's worked for this." I stared at her. Hard she'd worked. Sloane, who'd never held a job longer than 8 months. Sloane, who borrowed money from our parents every quarter and called it bridging. Sloane, who was marrying into the Whitlock family the way some people apply for grants, with a polished application and a curated backstory. "Just wear the dress," Mom said. "Nobody's looking at you anyway." She went back to the flower girl. I stood in the hallway, the orange polyester scratching my arms, and I watched her walk away. 2 spare lavender gowns on a rack, 10 feet from where I was standing. One of them was close to my size. I'd seen the tag. It was the only one left. Was a lie. I knew that now. I just didn't know yet how deep the lie went. Let me tell you about my grandmother, Ruth Draper. She raised 5 kids in a house with 1 bathroom and a garden that fed the block. She quilted. She baked cornbread that could make a grown man cry. And when she got sick, emphysema, then a stroke that took her left side. I was the one who moved in. I was 28, 2 years into my first engineering job, and I rearranged my entire life around her medication schedule and her physical therapy appointments. 3 years. I bathed her. I read to her. I held her hand on the nights when she forgot where she was. Sloane visited twice. Once for Thanksgiving, once when she needed Gran to sign a form for a car loan cosign. Mom came on holidays. Dad called on Sundays. I was there every other day. Gran died at 84, on a Tuesday, with her hand in mine and the quilt she'd made for my college graduation folded across her lap. I mention this because of something I overheard at the rehearsal dinner. Sloane was talking to Daniel's aunt, a thin woman with emeralds, and she was telling a story about nursing my grandmother through her final days. She used that phrase, final days, like she'd been there. I only caught a fragment before Renee pulled me away to help with the gift table, but I heard enough. Sloane was telling them Gran's story. She was telling them my story. I didn't confront her. I told myself I'd misheard. That's the thing about being the responsible one. You give people credit they haven't earned, because the alternative means admitting your family is something you can't fix. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock in the Whitlock family's private garden. Boxwood hedges, a stone arch draped in white roses, 200 chairs on a manicured lawn. I stood at the far end of the bridal line, half a step behind the last lavender gown, so close to the edge that my left shoulder was behind the arch. From the guest's perspective, I was a smudge of orange at the margin of a lavender painting. The processional played. 7 bridesmaids glided down the aisle in synchronized elegance. Same fabric, same cut, same dyed-to-match heels that clicked on the flagstone in unison. Then me. Orange polyester catching the late afternoon sun like a hazard vest. No matching shoes. Nobody had thought to tell me the heel color. I wore the nude pumps I'd packed, and the hem of the 2XL dress pooled around my ankles like a deflated hot air balloon. I saw Margaret Whitlock in the 3rd row. She was watching me, not the procession. Her expression was unreadable, not pity, not amusement. Something sharper. Assessment. The ceremony was beautiful. Sloane cried on cue. Daniel's voice cracked reading his vows, and the guests dabbed their eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs the Whitlocks had placed on every chair. I stood at the edge and held my bouquet, which was also wrong, white hydrangeas instead of the lavender roses the others carried. And I replayed Sloane's words in my head. It was the only one left. The safety pin at my waist shifted. I pressed my elbow against it to keep the fabric from gaping. Nobody noticed. That was the point. After the ceremony, the photographer, a tall man with a topknot and a lens the size of a cantaloupe, organized us on the garden steps for group portraits. Lavender in front, he said, arranging the 7 bridesmaids like chess pieces. And he looked at me, then at his shot list. Orange, if you could step to the back row, behind the groomsmen. I moved. He shot 6 frames. Actually, could you shift left? You're catching a weird reflection. I shifted. He shot 4 more. Maybe just... He gestured vaguely toward the hedge. I stepped out of the frame entirely. Nobody called me back. I stood next to a boxwood topiary shaped like a sphere and watched them take 32 photos without me. Diane appeared once, whispered something to the photographer, and he nodded. After that, he didn't try to include me again. I've spent my whole life being told I'm too much for asking to be treated fairly. Maybe you've heard that too. From a parent, a sister, someone who was supposed to be in your corner. If you have, you already know how this story feels. Stay with me. It changes. Comment orange if you've ever been the one pushed to the back, and subscribe so you don't miss how it ends. I decided then. I'd survive the reception, congratulate Daniel, and drive back to Raleigh before the dancing started. 4 hours of highway, my own bed, my own life, clean exit, no scene. That was my plan. But as the last photo was being taken, Sloane and Daniel alone under the arch, I saw one of the Whitlock cousins lean close to Margaret and whisper something. Margaret's eyes moved to Sloane, then, slowly, to me. Something shifted behind her expression, and I felt it across 50 feet of lawn. The cocktail hour was on the East Terrace. String lights, a raw bar, a quartet playing Sinatra. I found a high table near the railing and nursed a glass of sparkling water. From there, I could see Sloane working the Whitlock relatives like a campaign stop. Handshake, lean in, laugh, touch the arm, move on. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was standing 8 feet away when I heard her say it. I put myself through school. Sloane told a silver-haired woman in a green wrap dress. Daniel's great-aunt, I think. Community college first, then state. Waitressing nights. Nobody handed me anything. My hand tightened around my glass. Those were my words. That was my life. Sloane had dropped out of a private liberal arts college after 3 semesters and spent the next 2 years finding herself in Charleston on our parents' dime. She'd never waited a table in her life. And the engineering work? The great-aunt asked. Structural engineering, Sloane said without blinking. Small firm stuff, but it's so rewarding to build something real. I set my glass down carefully. Structural engineering, my degree, my firm. My 12-hour days reading blueprints and crawling under bridges with a flashlight and a measuring tape. She was standing in a $5,000 wedding gown, telling strangers she was me. The great-aunt nodded, impressed. Daniel's lucky to have found someone so self-made. Sloane touched her collarbone, a gesture I'd seen her rehearse in mirrors since she was 16. I just believe in earning your place, she said. I picked up my glass, took a sip, set it down. The sparkling water had gone flat. I kept my face still, but something behind my ribs was doing math I didn't want to finish. I found Sloane near the dessert table 20 minutes later, adjusting a tier on the macaron tower. Can I talk to you for a second? She glanced at me the way you'd glance at a fly near your plate. Make it quick. I kept my voice low. I just heard you tell Daniel's aunt that you put yourself through engineering school. So? So you didn't. That's my degree. That's my career. You dropped out of Belmont after 3 semesters. Sloane picked up a macaron, studied it, set it back. Brooke, you're imagining things. I'm not imagining things. I heard you say structural engineering. I heard you say community college first, then state. She turned to me with the expression she used on waiters who brought the wrong drink. Amused, faintly pitying. You're standing at my wedding in a dress that doesn't fit, making accusations. Do you hear yourself? Her voice got louder. Just enough. Stop being dramatic. A cousin of Daniel's looked over. Sloane leaned in, lowered her voice, and delivered the real blow. This is why nobody takes you seriously. Look at you. She gestured at the orange dress, the safety-pinned waist, the bunched fabric. Then she straightened, put on her bride smile, and walked back to the Whitlock table like nothing had happened. I stood by the macaron tower with my arms folded over the polyester and felt the room rearrange itself around me. She hadn't denied it. She'd redirected. She'd used the dress she chose for me, to make me look unstable for noticing. That's not carelessness. That's architecture. I was heading for the restroom when my mother cut me off near the coat check. She had her fundraiser committee face on, bright eyes, locked jaw. Whatever you said to your sister, stop. I asked her why she's telling people she has my degree. Lower your voice. She pulled me behind a column. The string quartet swelled through the doorway. The Whitlocks have certain expectations, Diane said. Sloane needed to present a certain picture, a self-made picture. You know how these families are. She told them she's a structural engineer. My mother smoothed her lapel. She told them what they needed to hear, and she told them about you too, enough so they'd understand why you and she aren't close. The air left my lungs. What did she tell them about me? That you've struggled. That you have difficulties. That the distance between you two is because of your issues, not hers. She said the word issues the way you'd say termites. Something unfortunate, best handled quietly. Mom, I own a company. I have a professional engineering license. And nobody here needs to know that. She straightened, checked her reflection in the brass elevator panel, and gave me the same patient, closed look she'd given me that morning. Behave, Brooke. This is the most important day of your sister's life. Don't be the reason it falls apart. She walked back toward the ballroom. I leaned against the column and stared at the ceiling, ornate plaster, hand-painted clouds. Someone's idea of heaven. My family hadn't just excluded me from the photos. They'd rewritten me. I was the cover story, the troubled sister, the excuse, the reason Sloane could claim a life she never lived. The orange dress wasn't a mistake. It was a costume. I went back to my assigned table. Table 14, near the kitchen door, wedged between 2 empty chairs and a couple I didn't know who turned out to be the caterer's parents. I was halfway through my salad when Daniel sat down across from me. He'd loosened his tie and had the flushed, overwhelmed look of a man who'd just legally committed to a woman in front of 200 people. Brooke, I just wanted to say, thanks for being here. I know it wasn't easy for you. I set my fork down. What do you mean? Sloane told me about your situation, the estrangement, the struggles. I think it took real courage to show up today, considering everything. He said it kindly. He meant it kindly. He was a good man, repeating a lie he'd been fed like dinner. What exactly did she tell you? He shifted. Just that you two grew apart after your grandmother passed, that you had a hard time, and that you've been finding your footing. Finding my footing. I owned a company. I'd closed 3 contracts that month. I was finding my footing the way a redwood finds its footing, rooted, standing, unbothered by wind. But Daniel didn't know that. Daniel knew the version of me that Sloane had drafted like a press release. Fragile, bitter, best kept at a distance. She said you might be sensitive today, he added, so if the seating or anything feels off, please don't take it personally. He squeezed my hand, stood up, and walked back to the head table, where my sister sat in a cloud of white organza, laughing at something the best man said. Table 14. Orange dress. The sister with the issues. I wasn't a guest. I was a prop in someone else's production, dressed in the color of caution. I left the table during the salad course and walked toward the coat check. I'd get my jacket, find my car keys, and text Sloane a polite goodbye from the parking lot. That was the exit. Clean, quiet, no ammunition for the dramatic sister narrative. The coat check was in a narrow hall behind the reception room, dim lights, the muffled bass of the DJ warming up, a rack of wraps and blazers. I was reaching for my jacket when a voice came from the bench near the window. You're the one who finished engineering at State, aren't you? I turned. Margaret Whitlock sat on the bench with her pearl-handled cane resting across her knees. She looked comfortable, like she'd been waiting. Not for me specifically, just waiting for the moment she knew would come. I'm sorry? Structural engineering. You transferred from Wake Tech. Finished at NC State. Class of 2017, I believe. She said it the way you'd confirm a shipping address. Matter of fact, precise. My pulse picked up. How do you know that? I'm 79, dear. I don't sign checks without reading the fine print. She tilted her head, studying me the way she'd studied the florist at the rehearsal, not judging, cataloging. Interesting dress. It was the only one left, I said. The words came out flat and automatic, and for the first time I heard how absurd they sounded spoken aloud. Margaret's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something closer to confirmation. She said. Was it? It wasn't a question. She tapped her cane twice against the tile floor, a period at the end of a sentence, and nodded toward the reception hall. I think you should stay for the toasts, Brooke. You'll want to be here for what comes after. She stood, adjusted her shawl, and walked back toward the ballroom at a pace that suggested she had never once been late for anything that mattered. I stood in the coat check hallway for a long time after Margaret left. My car keys were in my hand. My jacket was half off the hanger. Every reasonable bone in my body said drive home, but Margaret's voice stayed. Precise, unhurried, certain. You'll want to be here for what comes after. I put the jacket back. I walked toward the reception hall. Renee intercepted me at the entrance like a linebacker who'd studied the playbook. Where have you been? The toasts are about to start. I was getting some air. In the coat room? She took my elbow, not gently, and steered me back to table 14. Sit down, Brooke. Stop being dramatic. That phrase again. It had followed me all day, from the bridal suite to the hallway, to the photo session to the column behind the coat check. Every time I opened my mouth to name what was happening, that phrase was waiting to close it. Stop being dramatic. As if noticing cruelty is a performance. As if naming a lie is theater. I sat. The caterer's parents were eating bread rolls and discussing a cruise. I straightened the orange dress over my knees, felt the safety pin shift against my ribs, and waited. The DJ lowered the music. The maid of honor, Sloane's college friend, a woman named Tara with flawless eyeliner and the energy of a sorority president, picked up the microphone. The room quieted, glasses lifted, and I sat at table 14, in a dress 3 sizes too big, and waited for whatever Margaret Whitlock had decided was worth staying for. My hands were steady. That surprised me. The toast hadn't started yet when it happened. Tara was adjusting the mic, and people were still settling, and I reached under my chair for my phone to check the time. My hand closed around a phone that wasn't mine. Same case, black silicone, no frills. But the lock screen showed a photo of Sloane and our mother at a spa day. Diane's phone. She'd been sitting at the table next to mine before the toasts, and must have left it when she moved to the head table. A notification banner lit the screen. Bennett Girls Group Chat. 3 new messages. I should have put the phone down. I should have set it face down on the chair and pretended I never saw it. Instead, I swiped. The messages loaded. The chat went back weeks. I scrolled, and my hands stopped being steady. Renee, 3 weeks ago. What about the orange one in the clearance section? It's hideous and it's huge. Diane, perfect. She'll look like she doesn't belong, which she doesn't. Sloane, make sure the photographer knows to keep her in the back. If she's in the front, Daniel's family will wonder why she looks like that. Diane, already handled. There was more. Screenshots of what Sloane had told Daniel's family, a narrative so thorough it read like a dossier. My career became hers. My degree became hers. Gran's final days became hers. And I became the older sister who had a breakdown after our grandmother died and has been estranged from the family ever since. One line from Sloane stopped my scrolling. Told them I nursed Gran through hospice. They loved it. Margaret especially. I set the phone down on the chair, screen facing down. My hands were shaking. Not with anger, with clarity. I had options. I could stand up, walk to the head table and read those messages out loud to 200 people. I could pull Sloane aside and make her admit it. I could forward the entire thread to Daniel and let the truth do its own demolition. I did none of those things. Here's why. Gran. Ruth Draper spent her last 3 years in a twin bed in my guest room, eating applesauce through a straw and watching cardinals through the window I'd positioned her bed beside. Her memory deserved better than a screaming match at a vineyard. If I made a scene, I'd become exactly what Sloane had described. The dramatic sister, the unstable one, the woman in the orange dress who ruined everything. I'd prove the lie by trying to disprove it. So I sat. I put Diane's phone back on the chair. I folded my hands in my lap and decided I would finish the toasts. I would leave quietly. And I would never answer another call from any of them again. I didn't need to scream. I needed to leave. Here's the thing about quiet people. We don't forget. We just stop explaining. I almost walked out right then. I'm glad I didn't, because the next 20 minutes are the reason I'm telling you this story at all. If you're the quiet one in your family, this part is for you. Hit subscribe and stay till the grandmother stands up. The DJ dimmed the lights. Tara raised her glass. And 2 tables away, Margaret Whitlock sat with her hands folded over her cane, watching the room with the patience of someone who already knows how the evening ends. Tara's toast was polished. She'd rehearsed it. You could tell by the pauses, the way she hit each emotional beat like a metronome. She talked about Sloane's incredible journey. She talked about resilience. She talked about a woman who put herself through school, built a career with her own 2 hands, and nursed her beloved grandmother through her final days. Every word was a brick from the house Sloane had built on top of my life. I sat at table 14, in my orange dress, with my hands folded and listened to a stranger eulogize my biography and credit it to my sister. The room was rapt. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Diane beamed from the head table like a woman watching her investment pay dividends. The Whitlock relatives nodded, approving, impressed, satisfied that their Daniel had married well. To Sloane, Tara said, raising her glass, the strongest woman I know. 200 people lifted their champagne flutes. I lifted my water glass. Across the room, Margaret Whitlock did not lift her glass. She was watching me. Not Sloane, not Tara, not Daniel. Me. She was reading something in my face. Or maybe she was reading the absence of something. No outrage, no tears, no dramatic exit. Just a woman in a wrong-colored dress, sitting at the wrong table, hearing her own life story recited under someone else's name, and choosing not to shatter the glass in her hand. Margaret held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then she set down her napkin, placed both hands on her cane, and began to stand. When Margaret Whitlock stood up, The room noticed. She wasn't a woman who stood without purpose. In a family where money was quiet and power was inherited, Margaret was the signature on the last page, the one that made everything official. The conversations around me faded, heads turned. The DJ, who'd been cueing the next song, paused. Even Tara, still holding her champagne flute, stepped sideways as if yielding the floor by instinct. Margaret didn't approach the microphone. She didn't raise her voice. She placed one hand on her cane and, with the other, gestured to a young man at the Whitlock table. Her grandson's cousin, I think, who offered his arm. She took it. And she began walking. Not toward the head table, not toward the dance floor, toward the back of the room, toward table 14. The room tracked her like a compass follows north. You could hear the rustle of napkins, the creak of chairs turning, the soft intake of breath from people who understood that Margaret Whitlock did not take walks during receptions. Sloane noticed. I watched her face change. The smile stayed, but the muscles beneath it recalibrated. She touched Daniel's arm. He looked where Margaret was heading. Then he looked at Sloane with a question forming behind his eyes. Diane half rose from her chair. Renee went still, her champagne flute suspended midway to her lips. I sat in my orange dress at the back of the room and watched a 79-year-old woman in a pewter silk jacket cross a ballroom the way a verdict crosses a courtroom. Slowly, inevitably, with the full weight of what comes next. I should explain what I only learned later, what Margaret had done in the weeks before the wedding. The Whitlocks had a tradition. Before any marriage that involved the family trust, Margaret personally reviewed the union. Not with lawyers, not with private investigators, with phone calls, conversations, and the social network of a woman who'd been a pillar of Shenandoah Valley society for 50 years. She called 3 people. The first was the director of the assisted living community where Gran had received home aid support in her final year. The director remembered Brooke Bennett, the granddaughter who came every day, who brought cornbread, who slept in the chair beside the hospital bed during the last week. She did not remember a Sloane. The second was simpler than a phone call. She found NC State's public commencement archive online, the one they post every May with full graduate names and degree programs. Brooke Bennett, Bachelor of Science, Structural Engineering, 2017. No Sloane Bennett on any list, any year. The third was to a woman named Janet Hubbard, a neighbor on my grandmother's old street, who told Margaret everything. That Sloane hadn't visited Gran more than twice in 3 years, that I'd moved in and managed the medications and the hospice paperwork, and that after Gran's funeral, Sloane had taken the pearl earrings from Gran's dresser and never mentioned them again. Margaret didn't confront Sloane before the wedding. She told me later she wanted to see how the family behaved in public, whether the lie was Sloane's alone or something the whole Bennett family had agreed to stage. The orange dress answered that question. The photographer answered it again, and Diane's careful management of every frame, every seat, every word I was allowed to say, that answered it completely. By the time Margaret stood up at the reception, she already knew everything. She just needed the room to see it too. Margaret reached table 14. The young cousin released her arm and stepped back. The ballroom was silent now. The particular silence of 200 people watching something they don't quite understand, but know they shouldn't miss. I started to stand. "Please don't get up," Margaret said. She lowered herself into the empty chair beside me, the one that had been empty all night because nobody wanted to sit next to the sister in the orange dress. She set her cane against the table. Then she reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were thin and cool, her grip precise. The way you'd hold something you intended to keep. The chandelier light caught the orange polyester of my dress, turning it vivid, almost electric. For 3 hours, that dress had been a costume designed to make me disappear. Now, with Margaret Whitlock holding my hand in front of every guest, every Whitlock cousin, every carefully placed Lavender bridesmaid, the dress was a spotlight. You couldn't look away from it. The silence held. At the head table, Diane pushed back her chair. I could see the calculation on her face. She was composing her intercept, rehearsing the spin, getting ready to manage the moment the way she'd managed every other moment that day. Sloane's smile was still in place, but her eyes had gone flat. The kind of flat that happens when someone realizes the ground they're standing on has been hollow all along. Daniel was looking at Margaret with the confused, alert expression of a man who trusts his grandmother more than he trusts the evening. Margaret squeezed my hand once, then she turned to face the room. Diane got there first. She crossed the ballroom in 4 seconds, heels clicking, pearl buttons catching the light, her fundraiser smile deployed at full wattage. Mother Whitlock, how wonderful of you to come say hello to Brooke. This is my eldest. She's a bit shy. Keeps to herself. You know how it... Margaret looked at Diane. Just looked. She didn't speak. She didn't raise a hand. She turned her head, met Diane's eyes, and held them. It was the quietest act of authority I've ever witnessed. Diane's sentence died in her throat. Her smile stayed, but her body stopped. One foot slightly ahead of the other, frozen mid-stride, like a woman who'd walked into a glass door she hadn't seen. I wasn't finished, dear, Margaret said. Her voice was even, conversational, the kind of tone you'd use to correct a seating arrangement. But the room heard the steel in it, and the room went still. Renee, who'd been half a step behind Diane, took one look at Margaret's face and sat back down. She didn't say a word. Her champagne flute landed on the table with a small, defeated click. Margaret turned back to me. Her hand was still holding mine. Brooke, she said, I'd like to ask you something, and I'd like you to answer honestly. Not for me, for my grandson. I nodded. She was looking at me the way Gran used to look at me when she wanted the real answer, not the polite one. Did you care for your grandmother during her illness? The room leaned in. Yes, I said. For 3 years. To the end. Margaret nodded slowly, like someone confirming arithmetic they'd already done. And your degree? Civil engineering, NC State? That's yours? Structural engineering. Yes. And the firm in Raleigh? Mine. Co-owned with my business partner. 6 years. She didn't react with surprise. She reacted with completion. The last piece of a puzzle she'd already assembled, clicking into place in front of witnesses. I could have said more. I could have listed every lie Sloane had told, every credit she'd stolen, every detail of the group chat I'd seen on Diane's phone. I had enough ammunition to level the room. I didn't use it. I answered Margaret's questions with facts. Short, direct, verifiable. That was enough. Because the truth doesn't need volume. It just needs someone willing to ask the right questions out loud. The guests at the nearest tables had gone quiet. The Whitlock great-aunt in the green wrap, the one Sloane had told about her engineering career, was staring at Sloane with the expression of someone recalculating a tip. Daniel had turned fully in his chair. He wasn't looking at Margaret anymore. He was looking at Sloane. Sloane told us she built that firm, he said. Not to me, not to Margaret. To the air between us, like a man testing whether the words sounded as wrong out loud as they did in his head. She told us a lot of things, Margaret said quietly. Sloane stood up from the head table. The organza of her gown rustled like paper. Her face had the tight porcelain look of someone whose mask is cracking from the inside. Smile still there, but the architecture beneath it buckling. Sloane laughed. It was her cocktail party laugh. Bright, dismissive, designed to make the other person feel small. Okay, this is getting ridiculous, she said, smoothing her gown with both hands. Brooke has always been jealous of me. This is exactly what I warned everyone about. She can't stand that today isn't about her. She reached for Daniel's arm. Honey, let's go cut the cake. This is our day. Daniel didn't move. He was still in his chair, one hand on the armrest, the other resting on the table beside his untouched champagne. Sloane, she just said the firm is hers. She's lying. Your grandmother asked her directly. His grandmother is confused. She's 79. The room absorbed that sentence like a sponge absorbs bleach, silently, with visible damage. Margaret's cane tapped once against the floor. She didn't respond to the insult. She didn't need to. Every Whitlock in the room had just heard the bride call their family matriarch confused, and the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. Daniel pulled his arm back, slowly, The way you pull your hand away from a stove when you realize it's on. Did you tell my family you were a structural engineer? Sloane's smile was still holding, but her breathing had changed. Faster, shallower, the rhythm of someone whose exits are closing one by one. Daniel, this is our wedding. Can we please not? Did you tell them you took care of your grandmother? I helped. I was there. Twice, I said. I didn't plan to speak. The word came out on its own. Not loud, not angry. A correction. Like fixing a decimal point in a structural load calculation. You visited twice in 3 years. The reception hall had the suspended quality of a held breath. Forks rested on plates. Napkins stayed in laps. Even the caterers had stopped moving between the kitchen doors. Sloane looked at me. For the first time all day, she looked at me with something other than rehearsed indifference, and what I saw beneath it was fear. Not the dramatic kind, the structural kind, the kind that happens when load-bearing walls start to crack and you realize the whole facade is coming down. You don't know what you're talking about, she said. But her voice was thinner now. The charm had burned off like fog. Diane moved forward again, this time with purpose. This is absurd. Brooke has always resented her sister's success. She's making a scene to... Mrs. Bennet. Margaret's voice cut the air cleanly. 1 word. 2 syllables. Diane stopped. I made 3 phone calls before this wedding, Margaret continued. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't stood from the chair beside me. She spoke the way old money always speaks. Quietly, because it doesn't need to be loud to be final. I spoke with the director of the care facility where Ruth Draper received home health support. I spoke with the alumni office at NC State. And I spoke with your mother's neighbor of 40 years, Janet Hubbard. She paused. The names landed like stones in still water. Specific, verifiable, inarguable. Diane's face lost its color. Not gradually. All at once, the way a screen goes dark when you pull the plug. Sloane took a half step backward. Her heel caught the train of her gown. Margaret turned to me, still holding my hand, and said 6 words. You're not the sister she described. 6 words, spoken at normal volume, no microphone, no theatrics. Just a 79-year-old woman holding the hand of a 33-year-old engineer in an orange dress, telling the truth to a room that had been fed a lie. The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds, but I felt every one of them like a pulse. Then Margaret spoke again, still calm, still seated, still holding my hand. The woman in this dress is Brooke Bennet. She is a licensed structural engineer. She co-owns a firm in Raleigh. She put herself through college waiting tables, and she spent 3 years caring for her grandmother, Ruth Draper, until Ruth passed away in Brooke's guest bedroom, holding Brooke's hand. She looked at Sloane. Your bride told my family a different story. She told us she did those things. She told us her sister was estranged and troubled. She told us a great many things, Daniel, and I'm afraid none of them were true. Daniel stood. His chair scraped against the floor, the loudest sound in the room. Sloane. She didn't answer. She was staring at Margaret with the wide, frozen look of someone watching a building she'd constructed collapse in real time. Sloane. Is any of this true? She's lying, Sloane whispered. All of them. They're all lying. I also know about the debts, Margaret said. She said it gently, almost apologetically, the way a doctor delivers a result they wish were different. The credit cards, the personal loans, the overdraft your parents have been covering. I know about all of it. That was the fracture point. Not the 6 words, not the engineering degree, the debts. Because the debts were the foundation of the entire performance. The reason Sloane needed Daniel, needed the Whitlocks, needed the lavender gowns and the grand entrance and the fabricated biography. Without the marriage, the debts had no exit. And now the room knew. Daniel took a step back from the head table. Just 1 step. But in a room that quiet, it sounded like a sentence. You told my grandmother you were an engineer. Daniel, listen to me. You told my family you nursed your grandmother. You told them your sister had a breakdown. I was trying to... What? What were you trying to do? Sloane's composure shattered the way composure always does, not gracefully. Her eyes filled, her voice pitched upward. You don't understand the pressure. You don't know what it's like to have nothing and pretend you have everything. You had a sister, Daniel said. You had a sister who actually did those things, and you stole her story and put her in a clown dress so nobody would believe her. Diane lunged, not physically, verbally. She stepped forward, pointed at me, and delivered the line she'd been deploying all day, the one she'd used like a fire extinguisher every time the truth tried to catch. She's poisoned you against us. This is exactly what she does. She makes everything about her. Stop being dramatic. The phrase hung in the air, finally, in front of witnesses. 200 people had just watched a grandmother expose a fraud and a mother defend it. The words "stop being dramatic" didn't land the way Diane intended. They landed the way a confession lands, revealing not the accused, but the accuser. Renee sat at her table, both hands flat on the tablecloth, motionless. She looked like a woman doing math she didn't want to finish. The Whitlock great-aunt set down her glass. Daniel's father stood up, then sat down, then stood up again. Sloane turned to me, not to Margaret, not to Daniel, to me. And the mask came off, all the way. You always had to be better than me. Her voice was raw, stripped of the charm and the camera-ready inflection. She sounded 20 years old, younger even. The little sister standing in the shadow of someone who never tried to cast one. You got the grades. You got Grand's attention. You got the career. And you didn't even have to try. It just came to you. And I got nothing. I got Mom's anxiety and Dad's silence and a college I couldn't finish and debt I couldn't explain to anyone without them looking at me like I was broken. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, recognition. I saw the version of her that was real, underneath the lies and the lavender and the performance. She was drowning, and she'd used me as a raft. But then she straightened, and the vulnerability collapsed into something harder. This was supposed to be my day, my one day, and you couldn't even give me that. She said it like I'd taken something from her. Like standing silently in a linen closet, wearing a dress she chose specifically to humiliate me, while she stole my education, my grief, and my grandmother's final days. Like all of that was something I'd done to her. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The room had already responded for me, in their silence, in their turned heads, in the way Daniel's hand had dropped from Sloane's arm and stayed at his side. Sloane looked around the reception hall, at the lavender gowns, the champagne, the 5-tier cake, the string lights she'd spent months selecting, and she saw what everyone else saw, a wedding built on a borrowed life. She picked up her train with both hands. She walked out the side door. She didn't look back. The door closed behind her with a click, not a slam. Somehow that was worse. The room exhaled. People shifted, murmured, reached for their drinks. The DJ, poor man, hovered near his laptop with the expression of someone who'd been hired to play Uptown Funk and was now presiding over a family implosion. Diane didn't follow Sloane. She stood near the head table, hands clasped, statue still, staring at the centerpiece as if it contained instructions for what to do next. Renee was already gathering her purse. Daniel sat back down. He put his face in his hands. His mother touched his shoulder. His father looked at Margaret, who nodded at him once. A small, steady gesture that seemed to say, "I'm sorry," but he needed to know. And then, there was my father. Glenn Bennett had been at the head table all night next to the seat Sloane had just vacated. He was 60 years old. He'd said 12 words to me all day. "You look fine," and "don't make a fuss," and "your mother handles these things." He walked over to table 14. He didn't sit. He stood beside the empty chair Margaret had been sitting in, his hands at his sides, his tie still knotted, his face doing something I'd never seen it do before. It took him a long time to speak. I should have said something. Years ago. His voice was quiet. rough, like he hadn't used it for anything real in a long time. I looked up at him. I wanted those words to be enough. I wanted them to be the beginning of something. An apology, a repair, a conversation that started with honesty and ended with something better than silence. But they were just words. 6 of them. Different from Margaret's 6. Lighter. Too late to carry much weight. Yeah, I said. You should have. Margaret released my hand. She did it the way she seemed to do everything, deliberately, with the sense that the gesture had served its purpose and could now be returned. You're welcome to stay, she said. Or you're welcome to go. Either way, you should know that the Whitlock family sees you clearly now. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak much, so I kept it short. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me, dear. I protect my grandson. You just happen to be telling the truth. She stood, straightened her pewter jacket, and walked back toward the Whitlock table with the same unhurried authority she'd crossed the room with 20 minutes earlier. I sat at table 14 for another minute. The orange dress bunched at the waist where the safety pin had finally given up. The fabric gaped, the polyester hung. For the first time all evening, I didn't reach down to fix it. I didn't tug the hem. I didn't smooth the fabric or press my elbow against the pin or try to make the dress look like something it was never meant to be. I just let it be what it was. Wrong color, wrong size, chosen on purpose. And I let myself be what I was. Right person, right table, right time. The caterer's wife, who'd been sitting next to me all night without saying a word, leaned over. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen at a wedding. I almost laughed. It was the only one left, I said. She looked confused. I wasn't talking to her. I was talking to the version of myself who'd believed it that morning, and the version who would never believe anything like it again. I picked up my clutch. I stood up. The dress hung like a flag nobody salutes, and I walked out of the reception hall without looking back. I drove back to Raleigh that night. 4 hours of empty highway, the radio off, the windows cracked to let the May air push through the car. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just drove, and somewhere around the Greensboro bypass I pulled over, unzipped the orange dress in the back seat, put on the jeans and sweatshirt I'd packed for the drive home, and left the dress folded on the passenger seat like a skin I'd shed. The marriage was never finalized. The officiant never filed the license, and Daniel never signed it. From what I pieced together through secondhand accounts over the following weeks, Daniel asked Sloane a series of simple questions, and Sloane's answers unraveled faster than the lies that held them together. The debts were real. 4 credit cards maxed, a personal loan from a bank in Charleston, 2 months behind on her apartment lease. The degree was fiction. The career was fiction. The grandmother story was the worst fiction of all, because she'd looked Daniel's family in the eye and claimed my grief as her credential. Margaret Whitlock withdrew the family's blessing and the trust gift the following Monday. Diane called me 3 days after the wedding. I let it ring. She called again the next morning. I let that ring too. Renee sent a text. This has gone too far. Call your mother. I blocked her number. Glenn sent nothing. I went back to work on Tuesday. I had a bridge inspection in Durham and a client meeting about a